Imposing black walnut. Powerful, beautiful, maybe sinister to some people. Pretty potent plant. Juglans nigra. It's all over the place here in New York State. There's tremendous numbers of them right around here in Trumansburg and between the lakes of Cayuga and Seneca. From what I understand of it, they were brought here by the Cayuga peoples, the first peoples in this region, and every fall, pretty reliably, some years more than others, they just dump so many nuts on the ground. And what most people know of black walnut, the little that they know of it, is, oh, that's that tree that kills everything that grows underneath it. And on the outset, that feels like a pretty hyperbolic statement. But after 10 years of experimenting with it, it's not incredibly untrue. And so what I want to do is spend a minute or two and talk about what so far feels like it can work under the canopy of such an amazing tree. Easy thing would be to say, well, let's just cut it down. And maybe this tree ends up getting cut down because I've got so much other complex diversity, production, nursery work, etc., all in the understory here. But for now, I'm considering the presence of this black walnut an opportunity to design and understand who can thrive underneath it. So let me take a look at that. Side note, maybe first order of business is to say, not who can you make grow under the black walnut, how can you cope with the hassle of the juglone, the root exudate that restricts the growth of other plants, etc., but first and foremost, how do we start working with the crop that it offers? And I talk about this in other videos, how to process these, clean them, husk them, etc. If anything, this is probably the highest value thing you can get from a black walnut grove is actually the black walnuts. So start with that. Start with the yield that the system offers. And so that's what we're doing. Sasha and I have gone through 3 times now and harvested probably 4 wheelbarrow loads of nuts from here. And so then the second order of business is, okay, now that we know what the yield is directly from the tree, who can work with it? And I'll just say right off the bat, one of the first ones that I've known to work beautifully is autumn olive. And now another one of those plants that people are going to see this and say, they shake their head, how dare he plant autumn olive? What an insidious, horrific plant. I've talked about this plant in other videos. You make your own decision. It's actually illegal for me to propagate and sell this plant, so I won't sell it to you. But here's a shrub that will adore growing in the understory of black walnut. It fixes atmospheric nitrogen in the soil. It is a structurally sound shrub about which vining crops can grow. Provides an incredible abundant nectar flow when it flowers early in the season, and then it finishes the season with a huge amount of small, red, tasty, somewhat tart, somewhat astringent, but very medicinal fruit that you can dehydrate or value add, make jams, whatever you want to do with it. So autumn olive, real winner as an understory element, shrub layer to the black walnut. Along with autumn olive, one crop that I would describe as absolutely 100% reliable, if not just a critical component to design under black walnut, is pawpaw, Asimina triloba. You can see a little thicket of them in here. They've been here for 8 years. The largest one is actually producing its first fruits this year. And not only can they tolerate being under black walnut, both the shade and the juglone that's being exuded, but they absolutely adore it and thrive. I would even argue they seem happier to be under black walnut. Here's another one right near it. So absolutely these are in the root zone and under the influence of this walnut. Another tree layer, which can be managed as a shrub layer if you desired, is black locust, another illegal in many states plant. Oh my God, all these illegal, horrible, invasive aliens. Well, that'll be for another video, but I love black locust. I plant it all over the place. It is absolutely fine with walnut, and it is providing, again, atmospheric nitrogen stored in the soil with its root partnerships, providing pole wood eventually for fencing, firewood, nectar flow for bees, edible flowers, and partial shade and windbreak and all sorts of other elements. So that works under walnut as well. What I'm trialing and finding, I would say, mixed results with is hazelnut. It is purported to be juglone tolerant by lots of folks. I would argue that I would call it just juglone tolerant. I feel like there's another subclass that deserves to happen here. Let me talk about that for a second. You know, I look at the pawpaw and I look at things like black-cap raspberries or black raspberries, which not only are tolerant of black walnut but thrive and produce amazingly. When I see something like hazelnut or raspberries under black walnut, I would describe them as just tolerant. In other words, they can handle it, they can exist. You can be tolerant of one meal a day and a horrible work situation and abusive relationships. You can tolerate that, but you don't necessarily thrive. And I feel like these plants are tolerating black walnut but not thriving. I would not design a guild where I buy in cultivar hazelnuts or varieties of raspberry intentionally to go under walnut. If all I had was a walnut thicket, I would put them in. But if I had to design from scratch a guild for an existing walnut stand in which the walnuts will stay permanently, I would absolutely commit to pawpaw with no doubt. I would put autumn olive at the very top of my list. As you can see, one that's over here. Elderberry, which is off in the distance, certainly within the root zone of this walnut, is being influenced by the juglone. Elderberry seems to work okay. American persimmon can tolerate, handle, do okay with it. Redbud works okay. I've got a chestnut over here, which I would describe as being semi-stunted. The one behind it is happier, which is further from the walnut, but that may be because it's wetter here, so I'm not 100% sure just yet. Now, if I were to describe what I would think is the highest value thing financially that I could imagine doing under a walnut, and that's what's being prepped for here. This is all just sheet mulched. It's seeded out to daikon and turnip as a cover crop for now, but the entirety of this will be planted out to pawpaw for nursery sake. In other words, from the previous video that I made where I talked about collecting fruit from pawpaw in order to get the seed, these are all seedlings which will grow here for a year or two. They can handle being under the walnut beautifully. They like the shade, they like the protection, and each of these plants might be worth between $6 and $12 depending on size. By a long shot, that's the singly largest financial yield potential that I can extract from growing underneath a walnut, is to grow out tons and tons of pawpaws, either from seed to then resell or plant elsewhere, or to actually form a thicket of. So, relatively limited gamut of plants that I would describe after 9 years of experimenting that I would say work incredibly well under walnut. I'd love to hear from you. What other plants do you see under black walnut that work well? And I would like to open up the dialogue around the idea of acknowledging the deep value in leaving these trees where they are and working around them. They are pretty special, and once you start harvesting the nuts and really working with them, I think you'd agree that their value might be higher than any of the fun little playful guilds you could put underneath them. So we'll see. In this area, this walnut may go someday just because of the level of complexity and proximity to my high value production nursery spaces. It may end up just being too limiting of a factor for me, but so far it's been interesting to have it as a challenge, and I've learned a lot from what can work with it. Juglans nigra, the black walnut, powerful, beautiful, maybe somewhat sinister witch of the woods. I lived under a grove of these for a summer, and it felt like I was sleeping under a bunch of old, really smart witches that make incredible food. Thank you for watching.